This is my true story. I thought the house I built with my own hands would always be my safe place. I spent decades working, brick by brick, dreaming that in my old age I would be respected under that roof. But instead, my own son treated me like a burden. One summer, while he and his family went on vacation, he locked me in the basement like I was nothing. I sat in darkness, humiliated, hungry, angry. But I didn't stay broken. I did something that shocked my son. Before I tell you what I did next, please subscribe and comment where you're watching from. I was not born into comfort. Everything I had in life came from hard work, sweat, and sacrifice. When I was young, I worked 2, sometimes 3 jobs at once. I spent my mornings in the factory, my evenings doing carpentry, and on weekends I picked up small construction jobs just to make ends meet. I didn't waste money on luxuries. Every paycheck was carefully stretched to cover food, bills, and savings. But beyond survival, I had one dream: to build a family home with my own hands, a place that would last for generations, a place my children and their children could always return to. That dream was what kept me going when my body was tired and my hands were raw from labor. Brick by brick, I made that dream a reality. I bought a small piece of land after years of saving. It wasn't much, just a plot on the edge of town, but to me, it was gold. With the little money I had left after buying it, I started building. Nights after long shifts, I would mix cement under the moonlight. On weekends, when other men drank beer or went fishing, I laid bricks, cut wood, hammered nails. I learned everything I could about plumbing, roofing, wiring, because hiring professionals was too expensive. Every part of that house carries my sweat in it. The walls, the floors, the roof, it was all me. When the house was finally finished, it wasn't perfect like the fancy homes you see in magazines. But it was strong, it was warm. It had a wide porch where a family could sit in the evenings. It had a sturdy basement, a solid roof, and enough rooms to raise children. I was proud of it. I was proud because it wasn't just a house. It was proof that a man without money, without privilege, could still build something permanent with his bare hands and determination. I raised my son in that house. Every meal he ate, every bed he slept in, every toy he played with, all came from that roof I built. He never knew hunger the way I did. He never knew the sting of walking into a classroom in torn shoes because his father couldn't afford new ones. He had stability, comfort, and safety because I broke my back to provide it. I didn't complain. I didn't remind him every day of my sacrifices. I just gave. Because that's what fathers are supposed to do. As the years passed, I worked harder to maintain that home. I paid off the mortgage, every penny. I upgraded things as I could. When the roof leaked, I fixed it myself. When the furnace broke, I worked extra shifts to replace it. When the paint peeled, I scraped and repainted with my own hands. That house was never just wood and stone to me. It was my life's work, my pride, my gift to the family I loved. I told myself, one day, when I'm old and can't work anymore, this house will take care of me. My son will let me live here in peace, surrounded by memories, treated with respect. I pictured myself sitting on the porch, watching my grandchildren play in the yard, hearing laughter instead of silence. That was the vision that carried me into retirement. When I finally retired, I didn't want much. I handed over the house to my son and his family. I told him, "This is your home now. Raise your children here. Keep the walls strong." I thought he would understand what it meant. I thought he would honor the work behind every brick. I thought he would respect the gift. In my mind, my golden years would be filled with family dinners, warmth, and gratitude. I believed the home I built with my hands would be the place where I was cherished, not discarded. But respect, I learned, is not guaranteed by sacrifice. You can build a house for someone. You can build their entire life from the ground up. But if they don't value you as a person, they will see none of it. My son enjoyed the comfort. He enjoyed the security. But slowly, I began to notice he did not see me as the man who made it possible. He saw me as an old man taking up space. Still, I held on to hope. I thought family loyalty would never fail. I thought the walls I built were strong enough to hold respect. I was wrong. At first, life in the house with my son's family was quiet enough. I told myself to stay out of their way, to let them live as they pleased, and I would take joy simply from being around them. I kept my corner clean, cooked my own meals most days, and didn't interfere in how they raised the children. I thought I was being respectful, thought I was making things easier for them. But little by little, I started to notice the way they looked at me. The sighs, the rolled eyes, the small comments that felt harmless at first, but cut deeper as time went on. My son began to complain about me more openly. He would say things like, "Dad, you're always around. We never get space to ourselves." Or, "You walk too slow, you hold us back." These weren't just casual remarks. They were layered with irritation. I told myself not to take it personally. I reminded myself that young families need space, and maybe I really was just getting in the way sometimes. But the words lingered, and each one chipped away at the image I had carried of us all living in harmony. The daughter-in-law was worse. She made no attempt to hide her disdain. She treated me like I was an unwanted guest in the house I had built. She would forget to make enough dinner for me, so I ate whatever leftovers I could find. She rolled her eyes when I sat in the living room to watch television, as if my presence alone was a disturbance. She made comments about how old people smell and how this house feels too crowded. I was never directly told to leave, but I was made to feel like a stranger in my own home. The grandchildren watched and learned. Children notice more than adults think. They saw their parents dismiss me, mock me, push me aside, and soon they began to mimic that behavior. They stopped running into my arms like they did when they were younger. They laughed when I struggled to stand up from a chair. They teased me about my hearing, my wrinkles, my slow steps. I endured it all with silence because I didn't want to divide the family. I told myself love means patience. I told myself blood means loyalty. But every day, the cracks widened. One evening, I overheard my son speaking to his wife in the kitchen. He thought I had gone to bed, but I heard every word. "I can't take it anymore," he said. "He's always here. He slows everything down. He's old, and he's in the way." His wife agreed quickly. "This isn't his house anymore. He needs to understand that." Those words cut into me deeper than any insult before. Not his house anymore? I was the one who poured the foundation, nailed the beams, painted the walls. Every corner of that house had my fingerprints on it. And yet, to them, I was nothing but an obstacle. The small insults turned into open hostility. My son began to treat me like I was a child he had to tolerate. He snapped at me for leaving lights on. He complained that I wasted water when I took a long shower. He accused me of messing up the system when I used the thermostat. I wasn't a father anymore in his eyes. I was a burden, an inconvenience, a problem to be managed. And the daughter-in-law encouraged it, always whispering, always smirking, always reminding him that I didn't belong. I endured because I believed in family. I told myself, don't make waves. Don't fight back. Be grateful you're not alone. I clung to the hope that maybe, deep down, my son still loved me. Maybe he was just stressed. Maybe it was temporary. But each day proved me wrong. Each insult, each dismissal, each cold glance reminded me that respect had left this house long ago. The worst part was the silence of others. No one defended me. No one told him he was wrong. The children watched and copied. The daughter-in-law smirked. My son carried on. And I sat there quietly, swallowing my pride, watching the cracks in the foundation of family spread wider and wider. I thought I had built a house strong enough to last forever. But a house is only as strong as the people inside it. And inside mine, respect was rotting away like wood eaten from within. I still clung to hope, But deep down, I knew the truth. Sooner or later, those cracks would split open into something I couldn't ignore. The breaking point came the summer they planned their vacation. My son and his wife had been talking for weeks about leaving for a week-long trip with the children. They laughed about beaches, hotels, and how much they were looking forward to peace and quiet. I didn't think much of it at first. I assumed I would simply stay in the house while they were gone, as I had done many times before. I had no plans to disturb anything. All I wanted was to water the plants, keep the house tidy, and wait for their return. I had no reason to expect betrayal. But on the morning they were leaving, my son pulled me aside. His tone was sharp, his eyes cold. "Dad, just stay put while we're gone," he said. "Don't go wandering around the house. Don't touch anything." I was taken aback. I lived there. Why would I be treated like some unwanted guest? Before I could respond, he added, "We'll be back in a week. You'll be fine." His words felt dismissive, but I nodded quietly. I didn't want to argue. When they were ready to leave, my son called me into the basement. "Just go down there for a while," he said casually. I thought maybe he wanted me to help move something, maybe check the pipes. I stepped down the old wooden stairs, confused but trusting. The air was damp, and the single light bulb above flickered weakly. Before I could ask what he needed, I heard it, the sharp, metallic click of a lock behind me. My heart stopped. I turned and saw the basement door shut tight. The sound of the car starting followed. Tires crunched over gravel. And then, silence. I stood there frozen, the reality hitting me like a hammer. He had locked me in. My own son had locked me in the basement of the very house I had built with my bare hands. I pressed against the door, rattled the knob, shouted his name, but nothing. The walls echoed my voice back to me, cold and uncaring. My body trembled, not just from fear, but from disbelief. How could a son do this to his father? How could he treat me like an object to be stored away while he enjoyed his vacation? The basement was dark, except for the dim bulb. I looked around for food, for water, for anything. On a small table sat a half loaf of stale bread, a jug of tap water, and a tin plate. That was it. That was what he left me with. Like I was some prisoner, some animal. My throat tightened as I realized he had planned this. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't forgetfulness. He had intentionally left me locked away, discarded in the basement so he and his family could live freely above without the burden of an old man. The first hours were filled with shock. I sat on the cold floor, staring at the walls I once poured cement into. Memories of my younger self laying those bricks came rushing back, and now here I was, trapped inside them. Every creak of the pipes mocked me. Every drip of water reminded me that I had become a prisoner in the place I thought was my sanctuary. I ate a small piece of bread, drank a little water, and waited, hoping maybe he would come back. Maybe it was some twisted mistake. But deep down, I knew better. As the day turned into night, anger began to replace the shock. I thought of all the sacrifices I had made, all the years I had given, all the hours of labor that built this place. And yet, to him, I was nothing but a nuisance to lock away. My hands clenched into fists. The sorrow that had weighed me down for years began to burn into something sharper, something colder. This wasn't just disrespect. This was betrayal. I tried to sleep on the hard basement floor, but my mind wouldn't rest. I kept replaying every insult, every dismissal, every time he made me feel small. And now, this was the culmination of it all. Locked away like I had no right to breathe the same air, no right to walk the same floors. The basement that once stored my tools and materials now held me, the man who had built everything above it. In those hours of isolation, a realization struck me hard. My son no longer saw me as his father. He saw me as an obstacle. He saw me as something to hide, to contain, to control. The love I thought was unbreakable had been eroded long ago, and now the truth was clear. To him, I was not family anymore. I was a problem to be solved. And his solution was to lock me away like unwanted furniture while he went on vacation. I sat in that basement for 2 days, the walls pressing in, my stomach aching from hunger, my throat dry from rationing water. My body was weak, but my mind grew sharper with every passing hour. If he thought locking me away would make me submit, he was wrong. The basement didn't break me. It forged me. Every insult, every laugh at my expense, every cold look, and now this betrayal, all of it fed into a single fire inside me. By the time I heard the lock turn again and the door creak open, I wasn't the same man who had walked down those stairs. I was no longer just a humiliated father. I was something else, something colder, something determined. And in that moment, I knew one thing for certain. My son would regret ever treating me like a prisoner in the home I built. Those 2 days in the basement were the longest of my life. Time moved differently down there. Minutes felt like hours, hours felt like days. The walls pressed in around me, cold and damp, and every sound seemed to echo louder than it should. I had been left with a half loaf of stale bread, a jug of tap water, and nothing else. The bread was hard, dry, almost tasteless, but I forced myself to chew it slowly, rationing it out so I wouldn't run out too quickly. The water tasted metallic, like rust from old pipes, but I sipped it in small amounts, careful not to waste a single drop. I sat on the concrete floor, the cold seeping into my bones. My back ached, my knees throbbed, and my hands trembled when I pressed them against the walls. I stared at the faint cracks in the cement, cracks I remembered filling with mortar years ago. I built those walls. I poured the foundation. I made the basement strong so the family above would be safe. And now, I was the one trapped inside it, treated like a prisoner in the very space I created. The humiliation was unbearable. Each time I looked at that loaf of bread, I thought of dogs treated with more dignity. Each sip of water reminded me of the countless nights I worked overtime to pay for this house, only to now be hidden beneath it like I was worth less than the dirt under the foundation. I remembered the words of my son, "Stay put." And I realized that's all I was to him now. A thing to put away, something to be stored out of sight so it wouldn't disturb his life. The worst part wasn't the hunger, it wasn't the thirst, it was the silence. Above me, I could imagine the house empty, their laughter already far away on their vacation. I sat there alone, forgotten, discarded like some old piece of furniture. The silence made me feel invisible. It made me feel like I had already died, and the world simply moved on without noticing. I thought of all the years I had sacrificed, all the overtime shifts I worked, all the sweat I poured into building that home, and I asked myself, is this what it was all for? At first, I felt sorrow, deep sorrow. My chest hurt, my eyes burned, and I wanted to cry. But no tears came. The sorrow hardened into something else, something colder. Anger began to grow inside me, slow at first, then steady, then burning like fire. Every passing hour, the humiliation turned into rage. Rage at my son for betraying me. Rage at myself for letting him treat me this way for so long. Rage at the idea that I had given him everything only to be locked away like a criminal. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms until they hurt. The anger gave me strength where the bread and water could not. My body might have been weak, but my mind sharpened with each moment. I realized something important down there in the dark. Sorrow does nothing, but anger moves mountains. Anger fuels resolve. Anger gives birth to action. And I knew then that when I left that basement, I would never go back to being the quiet, patient father who endured everything in silence. By the second night, I had stopped eating. The bread was there, but I didn't care anymore. My hunger was no longer for food. It was for justice. I wanted him to feel what I felt. I wanted him to understand what it meant to be powerless, to sit in darkness with no control, to depend on someone who no longer valued you. I wanted him to feel humiliation, but more than that, I wanted him to lose everything he had taken for granted. When I lay on the concrete floor that night, staring at the flickering light bulb, I made a vow to myself. A vow that I would not let this betrayal go unanswered. A vow that I would show my son what happens when you treat the man who built your future like nothing. I whispered into the silence, "You will pay for this." The basement had tried to break me, but instead it built me into something stronger, something sharper, something dangerous. By the time I finally heard the lock turn and the basement door creak open, I was no longer the same man who walked down those stairs. The hunger, the thirst, the humiliation, they had burned away the weakness in me. What came out of that basement wasn't just a father. It was a man with nothing left to lose, a man ready to take back his dignity in the only way his son would understand. Not with words, not with lectures, but with ruthless action. When the basement door finally opened and I stepped out, my body was weak, but my mind was sharper than it had been in years. I sat quietly at the kitchen table, sipping water, letting the sunlight fall on my face. They were gone on their vacation, laughing somewhere under palm trees, while I sat in the silence of the house I built. And it was in that silence that the truth returned to me, a truth I had nearly forgotten. The house was mine. Legally, fully, completely. Mine. For all the years I had lived with them, I had convinced myself that the house belonged to the family. I told myself I had given it to my son, that this was his home now, his roof, his life. But the paperwork told a different story. I had never signed it away. I had never transferred the deed. Every tax bill still came in my name. Every piece of legal documentation still listed me as the owner. In the eyes of the law, this was not my son's house. It was mine. The thought hit me like a lightning bolt. While I was in the basement, humiliated and treated like trash, I realized I had been holding on to power all along. My son thought he could lock me away, silence me, erase me. But he had forgotten the one fact that mattered. The walls around him, the roof above him, the ground beneath him, all of it was mine. I didn't just build it with my hands. I owned it on paper. And that truth changed everything. I thought about the years I worked overtime shifts to buy this land. I thought about how I carried bricks, how I cut wood, how I wired the lights. I thought about how I signed the first mortgage document with trembling hands, unsure if I could make the payments. I thought about how I paid every bill on time, never missing one, making sure the house was always secure. My son had lived here all his life, but he never paid for it. He never broke his back for it. He never sacrificed a single thing to make it stand. It wasn't his house. It never had been. That truth filled me with power. I no longer saw myself as the old man locked in the basement. I saw myself as the rightful owner who had been treated like a squatter in his own home. My son had forgotten the law, but I hadn't. My son had forgotten who built this place, but I remembered. He thought he could lock me away and enjoy the luxury I provided, but he was living on borrowed time. I went to the drawer where I kept important papers. My fingers trembled slightly as I pulled out the folder with the deed, the tax documents, the bills in my name. I spread them on the table one by one, staring at them as if they were weapons. And in a way, they were. These papers were stronger than any lock he could put on that basement door. These papers were sharper than his insults, louder than his laughter. They were proof that the house was mine to do with as I pleased. For a moment, I almost laughed. All those times he told me I was in the way. All those times he treated me like a guest. All those times he forgot that every wall was built with my hands. He didn't even realize he was standing on ground that could vanish from under him with a single signature. That was the forgotten truth. As I looked around the house, memories filled me. I saw the dent in the wall where my son kicked a soccer ball when he was 10. I saw the scratch on the stair rail from when I carried up furniture by myself. I saw the kitchen table, worn from years of meals. Every corner carried history, but history doesn't erase ownership. The more I looked, the clearer it became. If he could lock me in the basement without a thought, he didn't deserve to live here. I leaned back in my chair and whispered to myself, "This is still my house." Saying it out loud made it real. The anger in my chest hardened into resolve. I realized I didn't need to argue with him. I didn't need to demand respect with words. I could take back everything he thought was his. Not tomorrow, not later. Now. The humiliation of the basement had burned away my patience. The sorrow had turned to fire. And now, armed with the truth of ownership, I knew exactly what I was going to do. I wasn't just going to reclaim my dignity. I was going to reclaim my house. And when my son came back from his vacation, he would find out the truth the hardest way possible. The moment I realized the house was still mine, I knew I couldn't waste time. My son thought he had silenced me by locking me away, but I would answer him with silence of my own, silence filled with action. I didn't shout. I didn't write him a letter. I didn't even wait for him to return. I simply reached for the phone. My hands, still rough from decades of work, dialed a number I hadn't called in years. My old friend, a realtor I had known since the days when I first bought the land. When he picked up, his voice was steady, professional. "Hello?" "It's me," I said, my voice calm, sharper than it had been in a long time. "I want to sell my house, immediately." There was a pause on the other end. "Are you sure?" he asked. "That house is your life. You built it." I closed my eyes for a moment, remembering the basement, the stale bread, the sound of the lock clicking behind me. My jaw tightened. "I've never been more sure," I replied. "Find me buyers. I want cash, and I want it fast." He didn't argue further. He knew me well enough to hear the iron in my voice. "All right," he said. "I know people who'll be interested. Investors. They pay quickly. If your documents are in order, we can move fast." "My documents are in order," I told him firmly. "I never signed anything away." The call ended, and I felt a strange calm wash over me. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting on anyone else. I wasn't begging for respect. I wasn't clinging to a son who saw me as nothing. I was taking control, quietly, efficiently. That same afternoon, the realtor arrived at the house. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where my son once mocked me for being slow, and spread the papers out across its surface. The deed, the tax documents, my identification, everything was clean, undeniable, ironclad. He nodded as he looked them over. "This house is yours, no question," he said. "Legally, your son has no rights here. If you want to sell, nothing can stop you." Those words filled me with satisfaction. For years I had been treated like a burden under this roof, but on paper, I was still the master of it. My son had forgotten that, but the law hadn't. The realtor made a few calls right then and there. I sat in silence, sipping my tea, listening as he spoke to interested buyers. Within hours, viewings were arranged. Investors wanted to see the property, and they didn't care that the current family living there was away on vacation. Money talks louder than anything else. Over the next few days, I walked strangers through the home. I showed them the structure, the yard, the basement where I had been locked. I didn't tell them that part, of course, but I touched the walls as I passed, knowing soon they would no longer belong to my son. Each step I took with those buyers felt like reclaiming something. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't a victim. I was a man turning humiliation into revenge with every signature and handshake. One evening, after the last viewing, I sat alone in the living room. I stared at the pictures on the wall, family portraits, smiling faces, all pretending to be what we weren't. I didn't feel sorrow anymore. I didn't feel guilt. I felt resolve. I whispered to myself, he locked me in the basement. I will lock him out of everything. The realtor returned the next day with an offer. Full cash, no conditions, closing in less than a week. It was more money than I ever imagined holding in my lifetime. I didn't hesitate. I nodded. Take it, I said. Make it final. We shook hands, and I felt the fire inside me cool into something steady. This was not rage anymore. This was justice. My son thought he had buried me in the dark, but he had only given me the clarity to act. Now, with a single phone call, I had set in motion the end of his arrogance. As the paperwork began to move forward, I thought about the moment they would return from their vacation. They would pull into the driveway, smiling, relaxed, tan from the sun. They would unlock the front door, expecting their life to be exactly as they left it. But instead, they would find strangers inside, their furniture gone, their home no longer theirs. They would scream, they would panic, they would call me, but it would be too late. The house would no longer belong to them. The house would no longer belong to me. It would belong to someone else entirely. And when my son asked, "How could you do this?" my answer would be simple. The same way you could lock me in the basement. The sale moved faster than I expected. Once the realtor confirmed the buyer, everything unfolded with precision. Papers were drawn up, contracts printed, signatures scheduled. I watched it all from my chair at the kitchen table, the same table where I had once felt invisible, and now it was the center of my power. Each document that appeared in front of me felt like a nail sealing my son's fate. I didn't hesitate. I didn't second guess. I signed each page with a steady hand, every stroke of ink stronger than the click of the lock he once turned on me in the basement. Within a week, the deal was finalized. The property I had poured decades of sweat into was no longer in my son's hands, not that it ever truly was. The new buyers transferred the full payment into my account, a massive sum larger than anything I had ever seen in my life. The numbers glowed on the bank statement like proof of my revenge. For years, I had lived quietly, eating modest meals, wearing worn clothes, thinking my role was only to provide for others. Now, for the first time, I held the full reward of my labor in my own hands. The lawyer handling the sale confirmed everything clearly. "Your son has no legal claim," he told me firmly. "The house was always yours, and you had every right to sell. There's nothing he can do." Hearing that made the victory even sweeter. For years, I had been told I was weak, useless, expired, yet here I was, backed by law, backed by money, backed by justice. My son thought he had power because he held the key to a lock, but I had held the deed, and the deed is what truly mattered. I walked through the house one last time after signing the final papers. The rooms were quiet, stripped of warmth. The walls carried memories, laughter from when my son was young, echoes of family dinners, footsteps of children running. But those memories felt distant now, almost foreign. This house was no longer a home. It had become a place of betrayal, of humiliation, of pain. Selling it didn't break me. It freed me. I touched the doorway gently, not with sorrow, but with finality. "You're not my prison anymore," I whispered. The buyers wasted no time. Within days, movers arrived. Furniture was carried out, boxes stacked, rooms emptied. I packed only a single suitcase for myself. The rest I left behind. I didn't care what happened to the dining chairs or the old sofa. I didn't care about the family pictures still hanging on the wall. Let my son return to find them gone. Let him see strangers eating in his kitchen, strangers sleeping in his bedroom, strangers walking on his floors. That would be my message to him, stronger than any words. The day the sale was stamped and recorded, I stood outside the house, looking at it from the yard. The windows reflected the sky, calm and ordinary, as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. That house no longer belonged to him. It no longer belonged to me. It belonged to people who saw it as a property, not a prison. And I was glad. Because the house that once carried pride had become a symbol of disrespect. Selling it was not just revenge, it was cleansing. When I logged into my bank account and saw the money sitting there, a lifetime of sacrifice suddenly felt justified. My son could no longer mock me, could no longer lock me away, could no longer live off my back. The chain had been broken, and I was the one who broke it. I didn't celebrate with champagne. I didn't shout. I simply sat in silence, letting the reality sink in. My son's arrogance had been erased with a few strokes of my pen. His power over me was gone. The beauty of it all was its simplicity. He had tried to reduce me to nothing with a lock and a basement. I reduced him to nothing with documents and signatures. My revenge was quiet, legal, clean. There would be no fighting in court, no arguments to win, no loopholes to exploit. It was done, irreversible, permanent. My humiliation had been washed away with ink. I thought about his face when he would return from vacation. He would step out of the car, carry his luggage to the front porch, slip the key into the lock, and nothing would happen. The lock wouldn't turn. The house wouldn't open. Strangers would greet him, not his father. He would look around in disbelief, confusion turning to horror. And then he would realize the truth. While he was on the beach sipping drinks, the ground beneath him had been sold. His vacation would end in ruin. As I sat with the signed deed in my hand, one thought stayed in my mind. He thought I was powerless, but he forgot who built this house. He forgot whose name was on the papers. He forgot who I am. And now, he would never forget again. Once the sale was final and the money safely in my account, I knew it was time to leave. There was no reason to stay a day longer in the place that had become my cage. The movers had already cleared most of the house for the new owners. Boxes stacked against the walls reminded me that my time here was done. I didn't feel sorrow. I didn't feel fear. I felt freedom. For decades, this house had been my pride. Then it became my prison. Now, it was neither. It was just property, and it no longer belonged to my son. That thought gave me peace. I packed lightly, just one suitcase, a few clothes, some personal papers, and small keepsakes that mattered only to me. I didn't take furniture, didn't take dishes, didn't take anything that tied me to the years of humiliation I had endured. Let my son come back and find nothing of mine left behind. Let the walls echo with emptiness when he searched for me. I wanted the house to speak for me in silence. No note, no explanation, just absence. The emptiness itself would be my final message to him. On my last morning there, I stood in the basement one more time. The same basement where he had locked me like an animal. I ran my hand along the cold cement wall. The memories were fresh. The stale bread, the metallic water, the sound of the lock. For a moment, the anger flared inside me again. But then I smiled. This basement no longer had power over me. It wasn't a prison anymore. It was just a room in someone else's house. And that shift, knowing it wasn't mine or his anymore, was the greatest relief of all. I went upstairs, turned off the lights, and locked the front door behind me. It was the last time I would ever hold that key. I didn't keep it. I placed it on the kitchen counter before leaving, letting the new owners decide what to do with it. The key wasn't mine anymore, and I didn't want it. The house had already taken too much from me, and I had given back my answer by selling it. Walking down the street with my suitcase in hand, I felt lighter than I had in years. I wasn't an old man being hidden away. I wasn't a burden to anyone. I was free. The bus stop wasn't far, and as I sat on the bench waiting, I thought about my son. At that very moment, he was probably sitting under the sun on a beach, drinking and laughing, thinking his father was locked in the basement waiting for his return. He thought he had won. He thought he had put me in my place. But when he came back, he would find himself locked out of everything he thought was his. The basement that once held me would hold only strangers' furniture. The kitchen that once ignored me would feed a new family. The living room where he mocked me would echo with different voices, and he would realize he had lost everything while I had walked away quietly. I didn't leave a forwarding address. I didn't leave a phone number. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. They didn't deserve to know. My departure wasn't just from the house. It was from the chains of disrespect that had held me for years. My son had forced me into silence, but now my silence was my weapon. He would return to find no father, no house, no explanation, only absence. The bus arrived, and I stepped on board, settling by the window. As the bus pulled away, I looked back at the house one final time. The porch, the windows, the roof. It all faded into the distance, and with every mile, I felt my anger ease. My revenge was already done. My departure wasn't an escape. It was a victory march. The aftermath came exactly as I imagined. My son and his family returned from their vacation a week later, luggage in hand, sunburned, laughing, expecting to walk back into the same life they had left behind. Their car pulled into the driveway, but the first shock came when they saw other cars already parked there. The front yard, once theirs, was now filled with boxes being carried by strangers. Movers walked in and out freely, unloading furniture for the new owners. My son stood frozen, his smile fading. His wife's jaw dropped. The children looked confused. Nothing was as they expected. He stormed up to the front porch, his key in hand, ready to unlock the door. But when he pushed it into the lock, it didn't turn. He tried again, harder this time, twisting, forcing, as if sheer anger would make the door obey him. But the house no longer belonged to him. The lock had been changed. The key that once gave him power was now worthless. He pounded on the door, demanding to be let in, his voice rising in panic. And then the new owner appeared, calm, collected, holding the deed. "This is my house now," the man told him flatly. "You need to leave the property." My son's face turned red with disbelief. "What are you talking about? This is my home. My family lives here." His voice cracked as neighbors peeked out from their windows, watching the scene unfold. But the truth was undeniable. The strangers inside, the moving trucks outside, the new locks on the doors, all of it screamed what he didn't want to believe. The house was gone. He grabbed his phone and called me immediately. His voice shook with rage when I answered. "Dad, what did you do? Where are you? The house, it's gone. You can't do this to me." His words poured out in panic, a mix of anger and fear. But I didn't yell back. I didn't explain. I simply said, "The house was never yours. It was mine. And now it isn't anymore." Then I hung up. He left voicemail after voicemail, his anger growing louder each time. He called me a traitor, a thief, a cruel old man. He begged, he threatened, he cried. But I never answered again. Every message was proof that he finally understood what it meant to lose control. He had once locked me away in silence, and now I returned the silence to him. It was the only answer he deserved. His wife tried calling too, her tone sharper, filled with fury. She screamed into the phone about how I had ruined their lives, how the children would suffer, how they had nowhere to go. But I remembered how she looked at me like dirt, how she rolled her eyes when I entered the room, how she treated me as if I were invisible in my own home. Their suffering didn't move me. They had planted the seeds of cruelty for years, and now they were reaping the harvest. The neighbors whispered about it for weeks. Some said I went too far. Others quietly admired what I had done. People love gossip, but none of them truly understood what it felt like to be locked in a basement by your own son, treated as less than human. Only I knew that pain. Only I knew the fire it had sparked in me. Selling the house wasn't just revenge, It was survival. It was reclaiming dignity. My son tried to fight legally, but the law was clear. The deed had always been in my name. The sale was legitimate. His lawyer told him bluntly there was nothing to be done. Every door he tried to open slammed shut in his face. For the first time, he felt powerless. For the first time, he knew what I had felt in that basement. Trapped, humiliated, defeated. I heard later that they were forced to rent a small apartment. No yard, no porch, no spacious rooms. Just cramped walls and the constant reminder of what they had lost. My grandson, who once laughed at me for being slow, now shared a room with his sister because there wasn't enough space. My daughter-in-law, who once sneered at me for being in the way, now complained about living in someone else's building. And my son, the man who once locked me below the house I built, now paid rent to a stranger every month. The irony was perfect. I didn't gloat publicly. I didn't stand on a rooftop and declare my victory. My revenge was quiet, invisible, but it lived in their every discomfort, their every regret, their every moment of realizing they had destroyed the one man who had given them everything. The aftermath wasn't just about their downfall. It was about my freedom. I no longer lived under their control. I no longer endured their insults. I no longer felt like a prisoner in the house I built. I had money in the bank, choices in my hands, and dignity in my heart. For the first time in years, I was truly free. Justice didn't come to me in the form of shouting, or in the form of courts, or through begging apologies. Justice came the day I walked out of that house with my suitcase and never looked back. For decades, I thought my purpose was to provide for my son, to keep giving even when I had nothing left for myself. I thought respect would be the natural reward for sacrifice. But I learned the truth in the darkest place, the basement. Respect isn't given back just because you earned it. If people lose respect for you, you must take it back yourself. And that is what I did. The money from the sale gave me a new life. I didn't waste it on luxuries. I used it to buy a small apartment by the sea. It wasn't extravagant, but it was mine. No one could lock me away there. No one could tell me I was in the way. I woke every morning to the sound of waves and the smell of salt in the air. I sat on the balcony with my coffee, watching the sunrise, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Real peace. Not silence forced on me, but silence I chose. For the first time in a long time, I started spending money on myself. I bought comfortable clothes. I replaced my old worn-out chair with one that didn't hurt my back. I went to restaurants when I felt like it, ordered the food I wanted, and enjoyed it without guilt. Every bite tasted like freedom. Every dollar I spent reminded me that I had taken back control of my life. Meanwhile, my son struggled. I didn't need to see it to know it. I knew his pride wouldn't survive losing that house. I knew the walls of that apartment he rented would close in on him. I knew every rent payment would remind him of what he lost, and who took it from him. The man who locked me in a basement would live the rest of his life knowing that I had locked him out of his future. That was my justice. I didn't care if the world judged me for it. People can say I was harsh, ruthless, even cruel, but they weren't the ones locked in a basement, treated like a piece of trash in their own home. They didn't hear the click of the lock. They didn't eat stale bread in the dark. They didn't feel the humiliation of being hidden away by the very child they sacrificed everything for. I lived it, and only I know how heavy that weight was. Now, when I walk along the shore and watch the waves crash, I think of that basement. I think of that lock, and I smile because I turned that humiliation into power. My son thought he had broken me, but in the end, I broke him without lifting a hand. No shouting, no fighting, just one phone call, one signature, one sale. My only final thought is he locked me in the basement. I locked him out of the future.